We've got other royal rifts, of course. But this doesn't just put her at, a distance from her parents, but also it's going to affect her relationship with her sister, because we understand...
For 6 years, she watched everything fall apart and said nothing. Not one word to the press. Not one statement to the public. Not one interview. Not one post. Not one carefully worded palace release carrying her name. While the cameras followed her father into one catastrophe after another, Princess Beatrice kept her face composed, her posture steady, and her mouth completely shut. But something shifted recently, and the woman who spent nearly 4 decades mastering the art of royal silence has finally begun to let the world see what has been happening behind it. What she has chosen to reveal, and how she has chosen to reveal it, tells a story that is far more layered and far more human than anything the tabloids have managed to capture. To understand where Beatrice stands today, you have to understand what she was born into and what that inheritance has cost her over time. She arrived in August 1988 as the first child of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and from her earliest years, the story of her father that she absorbed was one of genuine heroism. Andrew had returned from the Falklands War just 6 years before her birth as a celebrated naval officer who had flown real missions in a real conflict. He had performed casualty evacuations under fire. He had acted as a missile decoy to protect his fleet. The sailors he served with spoke of him with respect. The country had welcomed him home with the kind of public warmth that is almost impossible to manufacture. That was the father Beatrice grew up believing in, and that version of him was not a fiction. It had witnesses. It had documented records. It was real. What Beatrice could not have known as a child, and what took years of painful accumulation to fully understand as an adult, was that the man her country once celebrated was also capable of a completely different kind of behavior that existed entirely out of public view. Royal biographer Andrew Loney, in his extensively researched account of the York family, drew on more than 300 interviews with people who had direct personal experience of Andrew behind closed doors. The picture those interviews assembled was of a man who combined genuine charm with a level of entitlement that those around him found increasingly difficult to tolerate. Staff described extraordinary demands, petty humiliations, and a fundamental inability to accept that the rules which governed other people might apply to him as well. This was not the father Beatrice knew, but it was the father other people experienced, and the gap between those two realities became, over time, the central tension of her life. The period that did the most lasting damage to the York family name, and that Beatrice was old enough to begin observing directly, was the decade Andrew spent as the United Kingdom's special representative for international trade and investment. From 2001 to 2011, he traveled the world with a diplomatic passport, significant expenses, and access to some of the most powerful and most controversial leaders on the planet. Professional diplomats who witnessed him operating in that capacity were alarmed by what they saw. Among those who had been posted to Gulf states, Andrew had earned an unofficial nickname that captured their assessment of him with blunt efficiency. The nickname was not flattering. Leaked diplomatic cables from American officials recorded him speaking in ways that embarrassed the British government. Internal letters from former diplomats described his approach to international business as damaging to Britain's reputation for integrity. Through those years, Beatrice was a teenager and then a young adult. Some of her father's associates did not remain at a comfortable professional distance. They entered her personal life. A Libyan businessman who had been convicted in France of smuggling a firearm gave her a diamond pendant worth £18,000 as a gift for her 21st birthday. She accepted it because he was her father's friend, and she had no reason at the time to question the gesture. Years later, with the full context of who these individuals actually were becoming visible, sources close to the family indicated that Beatrice had been working through the complete picture of her father's world, and that the process had shaken her deeply. She was not processing tabloid gossip. She was processing her own lived experience, her own memories, gifts she had actually received, dinners she had actually attended, and friendships she had genuinely believed were what they appeared to be. In November 2019, everything that had been building for years began its final, irreversible acceleration. The BBC's flagship current affairs program had spent months trying to secure an interview with Andrew. The palace had resisted. And then, 3 days before filming was scheduled to begin, something changed. What changed was Beatrice. She arrived at the pre-interview negotiations without being invited, without being placed on any guest list, and without any official role in the proceedings. She was there because she loved her father and because she genuinely believed that giving him the opportunity to speak directly to the public was the right decision for him. The BBC producer who negotiated the interview, Sam McAllister, described Beatrice in her published account as the person who had her father's interests purely at heart. A royal expert who assessed the situation described Beatrice as the individual who created the atmosphere in which Andrew felt reassured and confident enough to proceed. She was not there in any formal capacity. She was there as a daughter who was convinced she was helping, and the impact of her presence was real. Multiple accounts confirm that Beatrice played a significant role in Andrew feeling settled enough to go through with the interview rather than withdrawing at the last moment. What happened on November 16, 2019, when Andrew sat across from journalist Emily Maitlis and the cameras began to roll, has been described by communications professionals across the industry as one of the most damaging television appearances a public figure has produced in the modern era of British broadcasting. The responses Andrew gave became immediate subjects of public disbelief. Within 24 hours, he had announced his resignation from public duties. Within 2 years, his military titles and patronages had been formally removed. Within 6 years, every title, honor, and official residence the crown had granted him was gone. And Beatrice, the daughter who had walked into that room uninvited because she wanted to protect her father, had been the one who helped make it possible for him to sit in front of a camera and dismantle everything that remained of his public standing. She has never spoken about this publicly. She has never acknowledged what her role in that evening ultimately produced. The weight of that knowledge is something she has carried entirely alone. If there is a single image that captures the position Beatrice has occupied throughout this entire period, it is not actually an image at all. It is an absence. In July 2020, Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli Mazzi in a ceremony that had been drastically reduced from its original design. What had been planned as a full royal wedding at St. James's Palace, with a guest list of well over 100 people, official photographs, and international press coverage, became an intimate gathering of approximately 20 people at the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Royal Lodge. The public reason offered was the pandemic. The fuller reason, confirmed to multiple royal correspondents by palace sources, was that a high-profile royal wedding in 2020 would have become, inescapably, a story about Andrew's disgrace rather than about his daughter's happiness. The only way to give Beatrice any protection was to make the occasion nearly invisible. Andrew walked his daughter down the aisle. He was present for every moment of personal significance that a father is meant to be present for. He gave a speech. He was there. And then he was systematically removed from every official record of the day. Royal editor Camilla Tominey described the situation plainly, noting that there was a sense that Andrew, and by connection Sarah Ferguson, had to be erased from the occasion. What remained, beyond the careful omissions, was a gesture from Queen Elizabeth that communicated something no official statement ever could. The Queen lent her granddaughter a gown, a Norman Hartnell design from 1962 that she had worn herself decades earlier and kept in her personal collection. It was altered to fit Beatrice and given to her for her wedding day. The Queen could not restore the wedding that had been planned. She could not undo what Andrew had done, but she could open her own wardrobe and offer something irreplaceable. And in doing so she told her granddaughter that she was still loved, still claimed, still belonging to the family in full. That gesture, set against the erasure of the official photographs, is the most honest document of Beatrice's reality that exists. On October 30th, 2025, King Charles made a decision that had no precedent in over a century of British royal history. He stripped his own brother of everything. The Duke of York title was removed. The rank of prince was removed. The Knight of the Garter, one of the oldest and most distinguished honors the monarchy can bestow, was removed. An official eviction notice from Royal Lodge, the Windsor property where Andrew had lived for more than 2 decades, was served the same morning. In the space of a single day, Andrew moved from being a prince of the United Kingdom with full royal standing to being a private citizen. Somewhere in London, Beatrice watched it happen. Footage that emerged from that day showed Beatrice and her sister Eugenie in what appeared to be an urgent private conversation. A lip-reading expert who analyzed the footage reported that the exchange revealed two sisters who understood precisely how serious the situation was and who were trying to figure out how to navigate what was coming next. The reported words attributed to Beatrice in that analysis were not those of someone in denial. They were the words of someone who had fully accepted the reality of her father's situation, who understood that the consequences were not finished arriving, and who was trying to think clearly about how to protect herself and her sister from further damage while not abandoning the man who raised them. What Beatrice has chosen to do since October 2025 is not what some observers expected. She did not distance herself publicly. She did not issue a statement of any kind. In January 2026, she was photographed riding horses with Andrew in Home Park at Windsor Castle. Her young daughter Sienna rode alongside them. The location and timing meant that photographs were always going to be taken, which means everyone involved was aware that images of the outing would be published. A source close to the family confirmed that she had seen her father multiple times and described her as supportive. When her second daughter Athena was christened in December 2025, Andrew was present at the ceremony, kept from the official photographs by the same pattern that had governed her wedding, but present in the room for the moment itself. Former BBC royal correspondent Jenny Bond offered an assessment of Beatrice's position that captured something important. She observed that Beatrice must have known she would be photographed riding with Andrew, and that the public appearance therefore represented a deliberate choice to show loyalty openly. Bond noted that watching parents face humiliation and isolation is genuinely painful, and that Beatrice, as the older daughter, likely feels a particular sense of responsibility for their well-being. Newsweek royal commentator Jack Royston noted that being photographed with Andrew had become a reputational risk for Beatrice in a media environment where association carries consequences independent of intention or context. What makes Beatrice's situation genuinely unusual is the degree to which she has constructed a life and an identity that exists entirely on its own terms, separate from both the royal institution and from her father's story. She works in technology and climate finance. She has spoken at the World Economic Forum in Davos on economic and environmental policy. She runs her own company. She is a committed patron of the Helen Arkell Dyslexia Charity, a cause she has spoken about with visible personal investment since her own childhood diagnosis. In the past year, she has taken on 3 additional patronages, including the Outward Bound Trust, which had previously been held by her father before his titles were removed. She has a stable marriage, 2 daughters, and a professional reputation that she has built through actual work rather than through the inherited standing of her family name. Royal expert Richard Palmer noted that Beatrice and her sister Eugenie represent evidence that not everything their parents touched produced lasting damage. That is a carefully measured form of praise, but it is genuine. The 2 daughters of Andrew and Sarah Ferguson have, by any reasonable assessment, conducted themselves with considerably more dignity and judgment than either of their parents managed to sustain. Beatrice has done this without institutional support, without a defined royal role, and without the protective apparatus that surrounds working members of the family. She has done it largely on her own, in public, while managing a private situation of extraordinary complexity. The title of this piece uses the phrase breaking silence, and it is worth being precise about what that actually means in Beatrice's case, because she has not given an interview. She has not made a statement. She has not sat across from a journalist and told her story. What she has done is something different and, in its own way, more revealing. She has made a series of deliberate choices in public that, taken together, constitute a position. She has been photographed with her father. She has included him in family ceremonies. She has taken on his former patronages. She has shown up to every royal public engagement with composure that body language analysts have described as visibly performed resilience. She has continued building her own professional life with apparent determination. None of these are words, but all of them are statements. Body language expert Judy James, who analyzed Beatrice's public appearances throughout the period following Andrew's formal detitling, identified consistent evidence of extraordinary emotional control. At the Sandringham Christmas Walkabout in 2025, James observed that Beatrice's smile appeared deliberately constructed in a way that communicated endurance rather than ease. In footage from the day the titles were stripped, James noted that Beatrice appeared genuinely strained, with the kind of controlled stillness that comes from someone actively managing what they allow to show. This is what breaking silence looks like for a woman who was raised inside an institution that treats public composure as a form of duty. The feelings are visible if you know where to look. The words remain unspoken, and the choice to keep them unspoken is itself a form of communication. The situation is not resolved, and there is no indication that resolution is close. Andrew, according to analysts who follow the case, retains a self-perception that has not been fundamentally altered by any of the losses he has sustained. The official documents covering his decade as trade envoy will not be released until 2065, which means new information continues to carry the possibility of emerging from other sources in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. Royal correspondent Roya Nika has written that the ongoing scandal continues to create daily difficulty for the monarchy as an institution. The York family name, as a functional asset within the royal system, is widely regarded by analysts as effectively finished. Beatrice's own titles and her princess status have not been formally threatened, but whether they remain secure through whatever developments are still to come is a question that has not been answered, and that depends on factors outside her control. She is the daughter of a man whose story is still unfolding. She is raising 2 daughters of her own inside that reality. She is maintaining a relationship with her father that the institution she belongs to has formally and publicly rejected. She is doing all of this while sustaining a professional and public life that operates by entirely different standards from the one her father inhabited. At 37, Princess Beatrice has not broken silence in the way the phrase is usually meant. She has not sat down and told the world what she knows or what she feels. What she has done is more subtle and possibly more significant. She has chosen, deliberately and publicly, to keep loving a man the world is turned against, while simultaneously building a life that does not depend on him, does not defend him, and does not require the world to change its mind about him. That is not silence. That is a position, and it is one she has arrived at through years of private reckoning that most people will never fully understand. The story is not over, and Princess Beatrice will be at the center of however it ends, whether she ever chooses to speak or not.